This program has been brought to you thanks to the generous contributions of our patrons on Patreon. Your patronage is greatly appreciated. And for more content like this, be sure to check out the Modern Alchemist channel on Patreon. So let's start with Andrew's question, and since he was the first one, and let's proceed from there. Andrew writes and says, "Woohoo, I've been waiting for this. What does it mean when we hear about Saturn being exalted in Libra?" My reply, that's an easy one. Saturn is associated with tests, limitations, structure, time, discipline, school, teachers, responsibility, obligation, perseverance, and ambition. Its symbol is often seen as a scale, as in the legal system where justice is blindfolded. And this system is an ancient association with the goddess Ma'at, who holds the scales that are used to weigh one's heart against the weight of a feather. Libra is seen as the zodiac sign of balance and relationship. It gains the relationship aspect from Venus, who rules over Libra. When Saturn is placed in this environment, it's like putting a fish back into the water. Commonly, when Saturn is placed in this environment, it is considered exalted. I think that were Crawley to describe it as a tarot orientation, he'd say that Saturn in Libra is well dignified. How's that? So I want to take a moment and just talk for a minute about the word exalted, to give a little extra meat on the bones of that skeleton, and help you understand the significance of what it means then to be exalted. Exaltation is a description of someone being raised up, right? They are at then the highest point. They are taken above all others, right? They are exalted. And this then, if you tie this idea to the concept of the up, down, in, out videos, where we talk about how at the center is also considered the highest point, right? So, and then when you consider, for instance, any structure that involves the highest point, all other things work in orbit around that high point. I relate that to Lapointe's work, David Lapointe's work, if you recall, and describe how the high point of the mountain, right, the highest point of the mountain is actually the center point of a Z-pinch along that is drawn up through the layers. The universe is set up as layers, like sheets laying on top of each other. And at the points where the sheets meet or touch or come close together, then they draw up and create a hypertropoid, which is the negative image of a torus. It's the inside, it's the hourglass that fits inside of a torus. That at that center point, that is also the highest point, right? So that's what we talked about in that other video. So when you recognize then Saturn being exalted within Libra, this is an exhibition of Saturn being brought to its center at its highest point, so that any other expression of Saturn could be considered less dignified because it's no longer exalted, right? Anyway, I just wanted to point that out, give you a sense that these ideas connect. These ideas represent other ideas, which then connect to it. And we're going to talk more about this as we work through our astrohistory and tie that into plasma physics, relate that to David Lapointe's work with his magnetic cups, which then provide us a physical exhibition of magnetic field lines, which lead towards the center of a Z-pinch within a Birkeland system, Birkeland currents. So all of that really does pull together. It all is about the same thing. And remember, of course, when we talk about Saturn, we're talking about Saturn both as an actual physical presence, as a planetary body, but also all of the corresponding associations to Saturn. Its godlike status and everything else that I had mentioned within the text. Its nature. The list that I gave you, by the way, that list of Saturn is associated with, this list is something that to me is reminiscent of the same kinds of lists that you get when you buy a tarot deck, and it says the magician is, and then it runs a whole list of words. Those words are descriptive of the character or nature of Saturn's activities within certain environments, certain contexts. All right, so I hope that just adds a little extra to it. We can talk more about exaltation. There's a secondary component to the word. It deals with happiness, with joy, and of course, that is a subjective representation of the state of being that happens when it is in its most favorable point, right? When it is lifted up, when it is exalted, then you're happy. So it makes sense to go that way. All right, the next question. Martin asks, what is the connection between 666 as being associated with the beast in Revelation, generally regarded as evil, and 6 being associated with Tipperet, the Christ consciousness, generally regarded as good? My response, I think that this has to do with some lost knowledge that was preserved. What knowledge, though? I believe that this is the structure of the carbon atom, which is the essential building block of all life, and therefore ties right back to Saturn. Carbon is built on 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. 666. Considering our previous discussions on how our physicality becomes our beast within, that we all must carry within us throughout our lives, our bodies granting us all that we feel and experience, it is this beast that must be quelled or subdued in order to have true dominion over ourselves and our environment. The 6 in Tipperet represents something different. This 6 is the union of 2 3s as depicted in the hexagram used to illustrate Tipperet. The 3s are a presentation of the masculine and feminine principle brought in union, made one, a complete whole via the alchemical transmutation that happens within that sphere. The 3s being the masculine and feminine vibratory emanation of polarized gender found within Saturn. Remember, each sphere holds within itself both the masculine and feminine, its relationship to the other spheres defining its gender expression. If there is to be a correspondence between the 6s, it's likely to be found in the act of sex, which is the core activity that is engaged upon to bring other people into existence and bind them to the bestial tendencies that come with the mortal incarnation. 6 made of 2 3s, man and woman, who carry within them the building blocks of life, the cornerstone of which is carbon, 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. The mark all life carries within it, revealing that we are not far removed from the rest of life within the universe. It may not be flattering, but we too are animals within a kingdom of animals and life upon this little blue ball we call home. So there is one other thing that I want to talk about. And I was hesitant, but then as I was finishing this up, I thought, we can talk about it a little bit because it's reminiscent of my recent experience that I talk about in the Alchemy After Hours and getting under my house. And specifically what I mean by that is you have to remember when we talk about this, we're also talking about this particular scripture reference relates to the mark of the beast. And this mark then is given upon the forehead and the back of your hands, and it's the mark that is associated with then one being able to have commerce. And there are a ton of tinfoil hat wearing folks who are super duper worried about us getting a tattoo of a barcode on our forehead or back of your hand in place of carrying a credit card or your cell phone or whatever. I am not among this community. When I consider this mark, I actually come from a more practical standpoint. And that standpoint is this. These documents were written by people who lived in a desert. And when you live in the desert, it is customary that you would wear clothing that would cover you to your wrists and expose only your eyes, which would then expose part of your forehead. If you are clad this way, and the thing that hit me when I was thinking about this was my own experience working in landscaping and stuff. And, people say, you got a farmer's tan. And I started thinking about that because I hated getting a farmer's tan. I just hated it. I'm so vain, but it's so true. I just hated it. You're like all pasty white, but your arms look awesome. And that's the worst. Anyway, it got me thinking. It really got me thinking, and then you get that funny tan around your neck, right? So that just your face is. And the thought I had was, if I lived in an environment other than where I was in the Northwest, if I was out in the desert, then the only part of me that would have been tanned would have been the back of my hands and my forehead, right? From bundling up. And of course, the other day when I had to go into the house, I bundled up in similar fashion so that I was down to my wrists, and then just my forehead and my eyeballs were visibly exposed. Everything else was completely concealed behind, clothing and a mask and stuff. And then I put gloves on. But in the desert, you don't wear gloves typically. You have your hands bare. So the mark then is associated with the mark of our star, being that you become tanned. And so the melanin in your body rises to the surface, and it marks you as having been exposed to this light. So when you recognize that that exposure also involves all the things that give within us our bestial drives, our sex drive, our drive to just go out and do things, right? It's everything, any drive that we have, it's being driven by this star that's stimulating the carbon composite within our body, right? And embodying us as a soul, breathing, living. We're doing that because we receive light from this star. We receive electromagnetic input. It sustains us by sustaining our entire environment. We are part of that system. It's undeniable. And by association, then, any ill that comes as a result of our contact of this system, because it seems to me that this system is a new system, that at the most, this system is at the most distant 12,000 years old, which pushes us back to 11.5 BCE, and the point at which the Sphinx was possibly built. This puts us back to the Diluvian period, right? Following the end of the Ice Age. So where the Earth was flooded as a result of a massive environmental catastrophe, which was basically the result of the ice melting and the climate becoming volatile. So prior to that time, we really don't know. But we have an idea, mythologically, that prior to that time, there was different light coming to this planet. And that change is the substance of all of these ancient mythologies, which were told from that point forward, but also are somewhat descriptive of from that point backward, but much less so. It's really difficult to excavate that. And when we talk about mythology, by the way, guys, I want you to realize it's sort of like being a paleontologist. I don't know if you ever studied paleontology. I took some paleontology courses at the University of Washington while I was there. And where you learn what everything is, and you learn about stratospheric, the layers, right, as you work your way down, and where things are and what that means and how much time possibly has passed. Well, the same applies as you work through mythology. You can't just assume that a character that you understand today is actually the character as expressed in a more distant past. And these characters often change and turn into other characters, or their qualities might change. And I believe that's because it's a representation of us moving forward in time. So an older version of a character might be one way, and as times change, the worship of that character changes. So, but regardless of all of that, it seems evident, based on the narrative structure of the mythologies, that there was a time when this light was not the preeminent light that was cast upon this planet. And so now that it is, those of us who are out in the light, we become tanned, and that tanning, that exposure, which anciently would have been restricted, right, to the backs of your hands and your forehead because you're garbed up, because you're protecting yourself from extreme weather, and those are the places where the authors of our ancient documents come from. We have to remember that the documents are subject to their narrative bias based on their experience of their time. So with that idea, that exposure, then it gives us all this mark. And so, like, Hollywood actors will get super tan, and that tan means that they're sexually virile, right? It means they're potent, they're that way. And so that at least seems to me to be a clearer and more possible explanation for this, the idea of the mark of the beast, and the nature of that mark, how that is expressed in our behavior, than to put the tinfoil hat on and say that someone's going to take a laser gun or a tattoo machine and put a barcode on my forehead or the back of my hand. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that we have to remember that these documents are ancient, and it is well more than likely that all, if not most all, of the prophecies, but I'm willing to say biblical prophecies, all have come to conclusion a long time ago. And that we are experiencing the after period of all of that cataclysm, which then is expressed as the good news or the gospel, right? That, hey, it's not happening anymore, and it should never happen again, because the system is now stable and we orbit a single star and there's no more disruption. And it is the quote unquote Son of God. So, all right. So there's my 2 cents worth on the 666 Mark of the Beast question. Next question from Marin, and she writes, "Hi Aubrey, I have a question about correspondence and rhythm. In a book on energy management, I read that our energy level during one day corresponds to the rhythm of a week. A good weekly rhythm in this sense resembles the daily rhythm. The weekly rhythm is originally a cosmic cycle. It is thought to have originated from the lunar cycle, which was used in biblical times by the farming population of the Middle East." See, we're talking about where the origin of this system comes from. The author's opinion on the subject: Monday is like early morning. The sun is rising. We feel energy and can get started. Tuesday equals the morning, and Wednesday the midday. After lunch, you are usually tired and take a nap. That's why Wednesday afternoon should be relaxed. In the afternoon, we get more energy again. That's why Thursday and Friday are good days to work again. Sunday corresponds to night. On this day, you should absolutely relax and do nothing. So far, so good. But in my opinion, there is one crucial point that is being forgotten here. Originally, the Sabbath day, day of Saturn, was the holy day and not Sunday, day of the sun. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath day of the Lord thy God. King James Bible. My personal experience is that my energy level is lowest on Saturday and rises again on Sunday. Saturday feels more like night to me than Sunday. How do you think about this topic? Which rhythm is more natural for humans? That we rest on Sunday or on Saturday? So this is my answer. Which day is better to rest, Saturday or Sunday? First off, let's talk about Sabbath observance and why there are 2 days that are observed, Saturday and Sunday, as well as what that means astrologically or astrohistorically. Astrologically or astrohistorically, observing the Sabbath on the Saturday is to pay homage and reverence to the planetary influence of Saturn, which is exactly what you mentioned. Similarly, observing the Sabbath on a Sunday is to show reverence or worship of the sun, something you also mentioned. That's an important piece to consider. Most are unaware of this, but the reason behind Sabbath observance from Sunday to Saturday, then back to Sunday in the New Testament are entirely different. The first reason is the conclusion of a creative effort. This is found in Genesis 2, verse 2 and 3, where the Lord God rests following his labor. I want to point out, just take a break here and point out that the Lord God, or Adonai Elohim, is associated with the character of the sun, whereas Elohim is associated specifically with the character of Saturn. So in chapter 2, when it says Adonai Elohim, or the Lord God rests, the original Sabbath observance then would be in honor of the conclusion of the rest of that individual, that character, and therefore it would have been observed on a Sunday. So I just want to throw that in there as a sidebar. Later, following the Exodus from Egypt, a new Sabbath day was selected to commemorate Israel's release from slavery to Pharaoh, and we have Deuteronomy 5:13 through 14, where we are told to keep the Sabbath day and remember how Israel was saved. So that's a big component there. I'm sidebarring again, but just to remember that one is a conclusion of a creative effort, and the second one was to commemorate Israel's gathering and freeing from slavery. Finally, the Sabbath day returned to Sunday again with the atonement of Jesus Christ. And so this Sabbath observance was to commemorate a new beginning, freed from the bonds of temporal and spiritual slavery that results from sin. You'll note at no time are we given any kind of rhythmic vibratory reason for Sabbath observance, but rather our observance is to maintain proper narrative focus on our origins, so that by understanding those origins, we might better understand ourselves. The first deals with the creation. The second Sabbath deals with the fall of that creation and its conscription under another master. And the final Sabbath deals with the redemption of that creation. Since we are inseparably connected to this process, the Sabbath becomes about us. This brings me to one of my last observations, one made some 2,000 years earlier, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that's found in Mark 2:27. I do not believe that there is some kind of super sacred rhythmic pattern to the days of the week. Anyone who has been unemployed or retired, like myself, will tell you that after a while, it really doesn't matter what day it is. They all kind of run together. Months matter, but the days just seem to blend together unless you make a special effort to give them significance, as in choosing a day of the week to set aside ordinary tasks for extraordinary ones. And my final observation, the modern calendar has Sunday at the start of the week, not Monday. This is in keeping with the idea of the atonement providing a new beginning, and that new beginning being observed each week. Sure, we say it's a weekend, but what does that mean? It means that Saturday is one end of the week and Sunday is the other week end. One starts, the other finishes, and how you choose to align yourself with it is all entirely up to you. The last question comes from Diana. I love the Q's and A's. My question is about rhythm. How strict is the principle in terms of how much it swings in either way? It seems a bit gloomy to think that when you're in great form, you can expect to not be soon. I understand we can affect this by applying vibration. Would it be that by living at a higher vibration, we can temper rhythm? But would that mean that we would also not experience such highs as before? And living at a higher vibration, which I could be wrong about, sounds a little vague. So I'm not sure I've even got that correct. I'd love to hear your insight on this. Thanks. Okay, and here's my reply. Here's some of the beauty of the principle of rhythm and polarity. No matter where you go on the scale, there will always be rhythm, always an up and a down, and an in and an out. However, where or how you experience this rhythmic flow is up to you and is based on how you polarize yourself to your environment. Think of walking in the dark with a really good lantern. Flashlights are too narrow focused for this analogy. You, at the center of the light, are in the brightest area, and as you move away from your lantern toward the surrounding darkness, you notice that the light slowly gives way to the darkness by degrees. Where you rest relative to the light will then show you the zone in which your rhythmic flow will reside. Polarizing near the source of the light means that the zone will have more light and less darkness. No matter where you are, you will always have some darkness in contrast to the light, even if it is on the outer limits of the light, in which you will have some light to contrast the darkness. Moving away from the light into that in-between zone means that you'll experience more of the darkness and less of the light. But no matter what, there will always be a kind of zone of experience surrounding you. So it is with rhythm and polarity. Where you choose to rest in life will determine the outcome of your experiences. If you choose optimism, then you will experience all the benefits and boons that are generated from that outlook, as well as some of the disappointment when your optimism fails to meet with the rigors of reality. Similarly, if you are a pessimist, you will enjoy the benefits of being a pessimist, but also feel that uncomfortable pinch when something unexpectedly good happens. Our decision to polarize ourselves and fix our position on the pole is one of the great gifts and powers we have as human beings. It is one of the great tools at our disposal to effect real change in our environment, because it is we who become the thing that has the power to change our environment simply on how we choose to look at the world and how we choose to process what we are experiencing. This goes beyond the trite live and love saying, where we try to adhere to something we may not fully understand. Hell, I'm still trying to understand the full range, scope, and power of love. Venus in Netzik is a profound teacher. But nevertheless, something that drives us all at our very core. For without doubt, it is love that is the great motivator of the universe at large. But regardless of our intellectual understanding, it is what we feel that matters most when focusing on concepts like rhythm and polarization. For it is our feelings that will guide us more than any other process of consciousness. Our feelings in our heart, given utterance and action by our mind and our body, become the direction of our rhythmic flow. Understand your feelings, really understand them, honor them, and master them, and you will discover that the world is amazing, beautiful, powerful, and free. I hope that helps.